Hi guys, today we're going to learn how to analyze our chromatograms using the reference library. So first thing you guys want to do as a group when you break from watching this video is go and collect 2 of these sheets from the materials station. You'll need 2 sheets because what you're going to be doing is taping in each of your chromatograms, and you have 6 chromatograms. That'll be 3 per sheet. For training purposes today, I'm going to just be focusing on teaching you how to analyze this chromatogram right here. So you're going to tape it in. Next thing you guys are going to do is draw a line to the furthest point that a pigment traveled. So we know that this down here is our starting line, right? As the water hit the filter paper, it traveled up the filter paper. It dissolved all of the pigments that made up that black ink. And the one that traveled the furthest got all the way up to here, and that would have been our purple ink right there. So you're going to draw a line, think of this as our starting line, and think of this right here as our finish line. So now what you want to do is you want to draw lines that mark the furthest distance that each separate color pigment traveled. So we know that they all started as black ink down here, but as they dissolve, the process of dissolving helps separate the different pigments. So my different colors were green right here, blue right here, and then my top color was purple. Then what I'm going to do is just count up the total number of pigments that I have, and I have 3, and I'm going to record that on my sheet right there. So this particular ink separated into 3 separate pigments. Next thing I'm going to do is measure the solvent distance. So right under total number of colored pigments, it asks you for the solvent distance. The solvent distance is the same as the distance that the furthest pigment traveled. In this case, that would be purple. So I'm going to go ahead and measure using my millimeter ruler from the starting line, which is right here, all the way up to the finish line, which is right there. You're going to want to make sure that you measure in millimeters and always include an uncertain digit. So when I read this, I got a solvent distance measured at 48.5 millimeters. So color pigment 1 is the pigment that traveled the furthest. So now I'm going to go ahead and fill out this section down here of my reference library. So the color pigment 1 would be purple, because purple was the pigment that dissolved best in our solvent, which was water, and traveled the furthest up the filter paper. The distance measured for pigment number 1 will always be equal to the solvent distance because they're the same exact thing. So I'm going to go ahead and record my distance measured as the same as my solvent distance, which is 48.5. Now once I have my pigment distance, I'm going to use my retention factor formula. This is located in the procedure for procedure B, number 6. And what that tells me to do is take my pigment distance measured, which is 48.5, and divide it by my solvent distance, which is 48.5. And when I do that, I get 1. And I'm going to plug that all in. As you can see, I already did right there. Now let's go ahead and measure pigment number 2. Sorry, that says pigment, but it should say pigment number 2. So for this one, I first have to decide what my color is. And for this pigment, our color was blue. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down here where it says color. My distance, when I use my ruler, comes out to exactly 40.0 millimeters. Now for my RF value, I'm going to take my pigment distance, which is 40.0 millimeters, and I'm going to put it over my solvent distance, which is 48.5 millimeters, and I'm going to divide both of those. Once I divide them, I'm going to round to 3 decimals. So I'm going to plug those into my calculator, and when I do that, I get 0.825, and you can see all of the work I did for color pigment number 2 right here. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and measure color pigment number 3. So the color for this one is green. The distance that this one traveled looks like it's about, let me see what I put on the next page, 31.0 millimeters. Got to have the 0.0 because that's my uncertain guess. And then my RF value will be 31.0 over 48.5. And then we have our units, millimeters, they cancel out, which gives us an RF value of 0.639. So a couple things I want you guys to notice. Again, the RF value for color pigment number 1 should always be 1 because we're just comparing the distance that that pigment traveled to itself. So that's always going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. Color pigment number 2 for blue is slightly less than 1. And then last but not least, color pigment number 3 for green is less than blue, because if we look up at my filter strip, blue traveled further than green traveled, but purple obviously traveled the best. So those are things you want to check afterwards. Make sure you have certain and uncertain guesses, and make sure you've rounded all of your RF values to 3 decimals.